Welcome to Ripstop on the Record, the podcast for makers, by makers, where we talk about all things MYOG. Brought to you by Ripstop by the Roll. I think it's good, right?
Yeah, I think that was a good take.
Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome to Ripstop on the Record. I'm Jameson.
And I'm Avery.
Today, we are talking with Matt Smith from Dream Hammock about what makes a great hammock fabric. For many of you who have spent countless nights in the backcountry in your wonderful swinging bed, then you may know a little bit about what makes a great hammock fabric, but you also may not know all the details. And for those of you that are the good old-fashioned ground dwellers, then you might be kind of inspired by a thing or two that we talk about today. So if you want to learn more about how to raise yourself up off of the floor of the forest and into the wonderful swinging air of hammock camping, then this episode is for you. Not to mention, we're going to tell you all about how to avoid ripping holes in your hammock, falling through, end up with the horrible shoulder squeeze, and the new word I learned today, calf ridge, I think it was. So if you want to learn all about what makes a great hammock fabric, stay tuned, because that's what we're going to talk about here in just a minute.
And since it's a new year, we're welcoming 2025 with a new year, new gear sale starting on January 13th. We'll be releasing 4 new materials. You heard me right? 4 materials, including 2 recycled materials. One might be a pack material. One might be a quilt material.
Who knows?
You'll just have to stay tuned to find out. And that's on Monday, January 13th. So follow along on our social media for some teasers and updates.
I've worked with 2 of the 4 materials so far, and I'm extremely excited about what we've got coming out. One of them is going to be a game changer in the pack world. I'm just going to say it now. Just be prepared. Start designing so you're ready for that sale. As always, please, if you like this episode or if you like this podcast, please like, rate, comment, subscribe, review. All you got to do is click on our show, scroll down to see the stars, and then click the 5th star, the one all the way to the right. Even the 4th one is okay too, I guess. But please let us know. It helps other makers and other people that are interested in the same things that you are find us and find the show. So if you like what we do, help us out by leaving one of those reviews. Write us some show notes or write us some
fan mail.
Fan mail, that's the one. Write us some fan mail or let us know what you think about the show. We're always really excited to hear what you all have to say. On to the episode, to the main bit. Yep, just stay tuned. Hey, Matt, welcome to Ripstop on the Record. We're so glad you're here.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It is about time that we had the wonderful folks over at Dream Hammock over. So we're glad to be finally doing this. What does the season look like for you and look like for the Dream Hammock team?
Well, it's kind of wild. So my wife had a baby November 22nd. So between that and then the Black Friday rush, and my father was sick for a week, and wanted to keep distance from the baby because the workshop is in our family home. It's been a little wild, but good. We're keeping up as best as we can, which, given the circumstances, means we're not keeping up. But people are understanding.
For people that are tuning in that might not know, can you share a little bit more about what Dream Hammock is known for, and what would you say is your best product?
Sure. Well, as far as what our best product is, I certainly hope that the answer is our hammocks. If it's not, then I think we need to go back to the drawing board a little bit. As far as what is our best hammock, I tell people it's kind of like asking what are the best shoes? Well, that depends. Are you hiking or are you tap dancing? So, we have a bunch of different models that suit all kinds of different needs. But we're known as a small business, very small, as I mentioned. We are, the workshop is in my family home. There's only one person who works here whose last name is not Smith. I think we have a reputation of being a comfortable hammock, or having comfortable hammocks. I don't know. I know that's true, but I'm really bad at like tooting my own horn and doing that kind of thing. But we do have a reputation of having very comfortable hammocks, very high quality craftsmanship, and the only thing I'd add to that is the degree of customization we offer is extensive.
Part of the reason that we're here today is that we wanted to use your expertise and your knowledge around hammock creation and hammock fabrics to talk and help people, our listeners, understand what makes a great hammock fabric and what they might want to reflect on when they're making a fabric. So, or when they're making a hammock rather. So for you, this is a very personal thing, like we heard about last episode with Carter. What makes a great hammock fabric is very, very biased. So for you, Matt, and your preferences, what makes a good hammock? What's your favorite hammock fabric, and what do you like about it?
There are a couple things. Some of the key factors. I mean, here's the thing. I could just say 1.7 MTN. 1.7 Mountain is by far my favorite hammock fabric. Yeah, I know what 1.6 Hyper D is really popular as well. What I tell people is like it's a fantastic hammock fabric, and it gets eights and nines in every category. But I think 1.7 MTN gets nines and tens in every category. um, but some of the biggest factors to consider are width. Just for the one of the main components to comfort in a hammock is having something that suits your needs, something that is sized to you. So having a fabric that is wide enough to allow, someone of a certain height to get that hammock, that's kind of important. The supportiveness is really important. And the last, I think, key feature would be durability. And, how long is this hammock going to last you?
Yeah, I think those are great. We'll make sure to link those in the show notes if people are curious and want to read more about those fabrics specifically. My next question is a little bit opposite of that. What are the risks to picking the wrong hammock fabric, or maybe what are the disadvantages of picking the wrong hammock fabric?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think straight off the bat, the most obvious one would be durability. And that's one of the things I see a lot is people choosing a super ultralight fabric. They want to cut every ounce possible. And I get the impulse, right? If you're backpacking, you don't want to carry extra weight. But when you're in the middle of, Georgia, having just started your AT journey and your hammock rips, or you get a snag and you're like, is it safe to lay in this thing or not? Having a hammock where the fabric is really able to resist those small cuts and small tears and those kinds of things, that'll do wonders for the longevity of your hammock and thus your satisfaction with it, right? Let's see, next one. There are a number of factors that go into comfort. I kind of touched on this, but size and supportiveness would be the biggest ones.
I would imagine, as someone that has spent as much time in a hammock as you or around hammocks, that you probably have a few instances or maybe funny stories. But can you tell us about a time when you used, maybe, I don't want to call it a bad fabric, maybe the wrong fabric or the wrong application, or maybe you ripped through your hammock or something like that?
You would think so, but also on the other end, I grew up camping with my father, who is a hammock expert.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
he never let me make those bad decisions because I had one of the world leading experts in making hammocks and knowledge about hammocks. That being said, we've all made decisions before. There was a time when I was in Boy Scouts, and I hung over a little too close to a rock, and hammock was swinging, and it only takes so many swings where you bump that rock and bump that rock and bump that rock until that hammock goes through. So I believe that was night 2 on a week-long trip down. I believe that was in Shenandoah on the AT.
Okay. Yeah.
So So what I did for the rest of the trip was hang under my friend Zeke, or not hang under my friend Zeke, but just sleep under his hammock. Yeah. It works.
That's what we call the backcountry bunk beds.
Yes.
There you go. I like that. That's a good term. I like that.
Yeah. So, from your perspective, what are some common mistakes that you see that people make when choosing a hammock fabric?
Sure. And, I keep going back to those same points of going too lightweight. That's maybe the biggest thing I see is folks wanting to shave those ounces and then regretting it later. And, you can damage your hammock, and that's a pretty obvious, what's going to go wrong. But the thing that people don't necessarily consider quite as much is the comfort implications of going too lightweight. I mean, the weight of a fabric is, for the most part, proportional to how supportive it is. And I don't like using the word stretchiness as much as I like supportiveness. I think anyway, we can talk about that later. But when your hammock stretches too much, that can cause issues, right? Two of the main comfort problems that people have with a hammock. Number one is shoulder squeeze, right? And that's when you're laying down and your hammock stretches too much and you feel like your shoulders are squeezed together, and that can cramp these muscles under your arms, and it's just not comfortable. And that's because your hammock's not supportive. Largely, it's that your fabric isn't a robust fabric to actually support your weight, so it's stretching at the pressure points. And then the other major comfort complaint with a hammock is calf ridge. And calf ridge is not exclusively, but in part due to a hammock that's not supportive enough. I mentioned it's going to stretch at the pressure points, and in the case of laying in a hammock, the pressure point is your butt. It's going to stretch most on your butt, and that's going to create a tight band of fabric right below your butt, because that's where there's less pressure. And because you lie diagonally in a gathered end hammock, stretching from end to end, you have that tight band of fabric that goes, and it ends up right along your calf. So it's something I don't see talked about too much on Reddit, on the forums, on Facebook groups. I don't see these kinds of things talked about too much, but it's a lot of it comes down to the supportiveness of a certain fabric.
Does Dream Hammock, or maybe do you personally, have some sort of formula or template for people that help them understand what weight material they may want to use based on their body weight, or for someone that isn't as adept to all the materials as you and I maybe, all the hammock materials that we have, what would they be looking for when they're looking at a hammock online and they can't touch and feel all these and lay in every single one? What should they be looking for to get the material has the right support for them?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And we do have resources on our website. We have what's called our knowledge base, and we have, I have maybe 8 to 10 different articles that I've written on there. Plan to expand it at some point, but time is always the factor. But we have guidelines for weight, and we used to call our comfort rating, we used to call our weight rating a comfort rating, because it's not about the breaking strength of the material, right? Like Hyper D is 260 pounds, and they'll email me and say, well, I'm only 200 pounds. Is 260, am I pushing it too much? Because I don't want something to happen and the whole thing to break underneath me. And it's like, well, no, a family of 5 could, even our lightest fabric could probably hold up a family of 5 for a short time, but it's going to stretch and it's going to be really uncomfortable for someone who's heavier. So yeah, we have various recommended weight ratings on our website. That's, it's just based on your weight.
That makes sense. It kind of seems like it's not a linear scale. Like it's not like, between sub zero point 0.5 ounces and you have to be 140 pounds, and zero point 0.5 to zero point 0.7 you have to be 150. Like it doesn't seem like it's quite that linear. It has a lot more to do with maybe fiber composition, the ripstop grid, or if there's a reinforcement grid at all. It seems like it has to do with those things more than it is just about the weight. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge factor. Particularly, you said the like reinforcement grid. That's what differentiates a normal square grid weft and warp ripstop pattern to an actual hammock fabric is diagonal threads that go across those, that lattice work that actually gives support in that diagonal direction. You know, you lay in a hammock, a gathered end hammock, you lay in that diagonally, which means you need that diagonal support. And I have a little example piece that I made just to show that off. So, this is a normal square grid ripstop pattern, and I can, doesn't stretch that way, doesn't stretch that way. If you go on the corner, I mean, there's a lot of stretch in that fabric, right? So what I've done here is to mimic that reinforcement grid, is I've got some stitching there, and you'll see it doesn't stretch. So, and that's kind of what we're looking at with that reinforcement grid, that things like the MTN fabrics and those dedicated hammock fabrics that make them such a good choice.
That makes a lot of sense now. I guess in a lot of ways I hadn't thought about it directly like that before, but why our Aerowave, our Mountain, maybe even the Hyper D, why they have performed pretty well in the hammock space because of those diagonal reinforcement woven pieces in between. That provides a lot of diagonal stability that I can see why that would make a huge difference. You've mentioned a couple kind of material attributes, and I want to get a little kind of a definition in there for people that that maybe are new to hammocks or just need a little bit more clarity on what we're talking about here. So kind of some attributes between hammock fabrics. We're going to talk about a lot. We're going to talk about the weight. So that's going to be like the weight of the material, typically noted in ounces per square yard. So like Matt mentioned, the 1.7 Mountain, that's 1.7 ounces per square yard. The hammock's going to be 11 feet normally, give or take. So a little bit less than 3 yards. That'll be kind of roughly the weight of that hammock. What would you add to the weight, my weight description there, Matt?
There's not really too much more to add, I don't think. The only thing that I would add would be what we had just talked about, is that it's not that the weight isn't necessarily inverse, or it's not, how do I put this? It's not necessarily proportional to how supportive the fabric is. A dedicated hammock fabric that is like our 1.7, we have 325 pounds, but there used to be a Ripstop 1.9 that we regularly used that we only had at like 250-ish pounds. It's a heavier weight fabric, but yeah. So not an amendment on your definition, just something that I think is
Totally
important for people to understand, because it's an easy assumption to make.
Absolutely. For that's where composition comes in. So when we're talking about the composition of hammock fabrics, most of the time we're going to be talking about nylon materials or nylon 6.6. An example of Mountain, I'm pretty sure, it's been a little bit since I've looked at that product page, but I'm pretty sure that's a nylon 6.6 material. That's where we're going to see a higher tear strength for a lighter material, is typically going to be with some of these stronger materials that are not adding any weight. We've said it before in the podcast, but for really new makers, nylon has a higher tear strength than polyester does at a similar weight, which is why you'll see nylon materials and nylon fibers used in certain applications where we want to keep weight down but strength at a maximum, which is why we're also going to see a lot of nylon and hammock fabrics. But the other flip side of that, the next kind of attribute I want to talk about is the stretch, or as you call it, the support. How would you define the supportiveness kind of mixed with the stretch of the material?
The reason I don't like the word the stretchiness, I think that sets up a false dichotomy that people think if your hammock fabric is stretching, that's bad, but that's just kind of how hammocks work. It's gonna stretch a little bit, and that's a good thing, right? It forms to your body kind of like a memory foam mattress or something like that. The question is it going to stretch too much? Is it going to stretch enough to cause that shoulder squeeze, to cause that calf ridge? Is it going to cause you problems? So it needs to have a degree of support and give.
That makes sense, and that's also probably extremely dependent on the material, on the reinforcement, on the fiber composition, all of those things. And then the last attribute we keep talking about is durability, and that one especially, I would imagine, is just really kind of up to the material. I mean, denier is not always a direct correlation to durability, neither is weight. So that's really just going to be dependent on probably a little bit of all these things: the composition, the weight, all those aspects.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the things, actually, just either last night or this morning, I was emailing a fellow who was asking about the durability of 1.2 MTN, and he was asking how long will a fabric like this last, and because we have a disclaimer for ultralight fabrics just saying they're ultralight fabrics, so you need to treat them like ultralight fabrics. You can't drag this thing like through the mud and stuff. So he was curious, how long will it last? And I told him that that's not really the right question to be asking, because it's not about like it's not about how well it can sustain damage. It's about how well it can resist damage. If you have a tear in your hammock and you put your body weight in it, you're putting, several hundred pounds of tension on that tear, depending on, the location. But that's the reality of it. It doesn't matter the fabric to some degree. If it has a tear and you put 170 pounds of pressure on it, it's going to at least get worse, if not completely tear your hammock. So then durability is a factor of not how well it can sustain damage, because if you're putting 100 some pounds of pressure on the damage, it's going to break. So it's how well it can resist damage.
Speaking of damage, my next question is about that and testing. How do you test a hammock fabric? Do you use ASTM testing data to validate your choices? Do you use real world testing, some of both? I'd love to hear more about how you test the hammocks that you have for durability, as well as for, comfort, all the things that we just talked about.
Yeah, sure. Put simply, we do our own testing. That's not to say we disregard the numbers that are put in front of us, but the thing, I mentioned we're a very small family company. We're not just sewers, we're hammockers. We're backpackers, we're hikers, we're campers. We got into this because that's who we are. So you throw a new fabric in front of us, what do you mean we're not going to test it? That's just kind of who we are. And there's something to be said about when someone emails you and says, well, what do you think about this or that? And it's like, well, the numbers say this versus, in my experience, these are the pros and the cons. I think there's a world of difference between, again, not to disregard those, studies and like how the numbers and stuff like that, but having personal experience, I think, really adds a lot to a recommendation.
A popular form of hammock for backcountry stuff is a 2-layer hammock, which presents all sorts of problems that are not problems if you're professional at making these, but problems and maybe just barriers for people to think about 2 different layers, and especially if you're making one. How do fabrics impact airflow and insulation, and especially if you're thinking about a 2-layer hammock? How do you mix these when you're designing your products at Dream Hammock? How do you figure out what goes on the inside of the outside? Is it kind of like a quilt where you're looking for a really soft, comfortable one on the skin, on the inside with a little bit more durable on the outside? Is it totally different from that? How does that process work?
Regarding in a double layer, when you want an inside and an outside layer, always the more durable on the outside. If you have two different fabrics, you're going to want the heavier one on the outside. It's going to make it more resistant to, briars and sticks and, any kind of damage. Most of that's going to come from the outside layer. In addition to that, the majority of the support comes from the outside layer. Inside and outside work together, of course, but you're a lot more likely to have slack in your inside layer than you're never going to have slack on your outside layer. I think that's one of the biggest components with a double layer. When we're talking about the insulation value or airflow value, for a hammock body, it doesn't really matter. Maybe slightly, but there's that like scale between technical and in reality. Like technically, it may be less breathable, but also in reality, does it? In practice, you might have a degree difference inside your hammock. But where breathability really does matter is an overcover, a winter overcover. Even that, a winter overcover is not an insulating thing. It doesn't insulate your hammock. If you want insulation, you're going to want a quilt or you're going to want a sleeping pad. That's one of the benefits of a double layer is you can throw a sleeping pad or something similar in between the layers. But yeah, the fabric in and of itself isn't really going to insulate you too much. It'll just redirect the airflow around your hammock.
You were talking about single layer and double layer hammocks. How do you know when to go with a single layer versus a double layer? I'm not a hammocker. Unfortunately, I'm what they would call a ground dweller, but
it's okay.
I'd love to learn more from you. Yeah, I think you already are starting to. And I'm just scrolling through your website too and looking at all the different options, and you're not kidding. You have unlimited amount of customization options for people to choose from. But I would personally love to know, and I'm sure others are wondering as well, like, when do you go single versus when do you go double layer?
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, I think the number one most common reason we get double layers is just the style factor. If you can have a cool color on the inside, people want to do that, and I get it. If I'm investing money into a hammock, then especially one of our custom hammocks, I think that's something really special to get something tailor made to fit you, to suit you. If your use cases allow you to add that extra weight, people are gonna, I want a cool blue inside layer to match my blue am steel and my blue pack hooks and all that stuff. So I think that's the most common reason. The other one is support. Heavier people who need extra support or just don't care how heavy their hammock is and say, well, I'd rather it be too supportive than not supportive enough, because it's, to some degree, it's hard to make it too supportive. Lastly, it's just a simple factor of durability. Two layers is just going to hold up better against any issues. And I guess the other reason would be if you wanted to use a ham or a sleeping pad, an air mattress kind of thing in between the layers instead of a quilt. It's a huge pain to use one in a single layer. Still a little bit of pain to do it on the out and a double layer too, but what can you do?
Yeah, no, okay. Thanks for sharing more about that. Definitely makes more sense. I would imagine that Dream Hammocks goes to a lot of the hammock events, HangCon. I know that there's this is not my expertise. This is Carter's expertise, but all the different events. So I was wondering if you have seen any trends in the hammock world, maybe with fabric technology or design. Is there anything right now that's really trending specifically with hammocks and hammock design?
Nothing too obvious comes to mind. The only thing that I can think of is, I forgot forget what they're called, but they're like where you lay perpendicular to the trees, not in line with the trees. There are a couple different makers of that style hammock out there, and I've seen a couple. It seems to be the kind of thing that's coming and going, and not. I don't want to trash talk anyone, but I'm not. I guess what I'm saying is I'm not seeing like an exodus from the gathered end, more traditional
Right.
hammock design. But beyond that, not so much.
Okay.
And you guys would know better than me regarding fabric technologies. You guys let me know. I want to play with new fabrics. You guys should make me new fabrics.
I'll get with Kyle and Carter to see what they've got cooking up over there. Matt, I'm curious about what your personal system looks like. I'm sure it can vary a lot. I would imagine you have quite a few hammocks at your disposal to pull from. But if you're going out for just a weekend trip and you're going to pull like your trusty system, what does that look like for you? Like, what Dream Hammock is it? What like underquilt or top quilt? What's your preference in terms of a whole sleep shelter?
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a good question. Regarding what hammock, if I'm going to be honest, we have on the top of that shelf back there, we have a whole basket of returns and used and damaged things and stuff like that, where I eventually intend to put them on the website in our clearance section, but that's a time consuming process. So, I just grab, if there's one that's suitable, I just grab one of those and go for it. But yeah, for my height and weight, 1.7 MTN, as I've sung its praises many, many times and will continue to do so, I'm going to use that 11 foot by about 62. I'm 5'9", 5'8", something like that. So 11 by 62 is a good size for me. Regarding what kind of model of Dream Hammock, it depends on the trip. For the most part, I'm not able to get out so much because, I have a young family. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this, my wife just welcomed our second son into the world less than a month ago. And I'm just in the stage of life where I don't get to camp or backpack as much as I'd like to, but it is what it is. But yeah, if I'm backpacking, the Darien is our lightest model with an integrated bug net. And it's very simple, very straightforward. And if that's not the case, I'd probably go with a wingspan. It's very, very straightforward. I don't necessarily need the bells and whistles kind of guy, which is funny considering, Avery, you mentioned the copious amounts of customizations we offer. You can go crazy, and people do. I swear there's a all of the above check mark somewhere that I missed somewhere. I don't know. It's crazy. Good for them though. Oh, and regarding the rest of the setup, UGQ. I know you guys had chat on here maybe a year. Oh, it came out on my birthday, I think. So January 31st.
You're welcome.
I believe is when that episode released. So yeah, it was a nice little present for me. But yeah, we use UGQ for both quilts, underquilts, top quilts, and tarps. They're another small company like us, and they make excellent gear.
Yeah, very much so. That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate how you are so familiar with all of your products. Like you have preferences on like which one you would take if you could get out, but it's also kind of funny and very relatable for, I would imagine, a lot of cottage companies that you just grab the one that's in the return bin or kind of go test it out. Like, well, I hope I can get this one back out on the site one day. That is pretty funny, but also very relatable.
You asked about some of the pitfalls in choosing the wrong hammock fabric or hammock specifications. Another thing is the width that a lot of people don't think about is how wide your hammock really matters. You see a lot of people, you go too narrow, that can cause problems, right? You have your ace endpoints. You're supposed to lay diagonally between those ace endpoints. If the hammock is too narrow, you just don't fit in between the ace endpoints, right? And then if it's too wide, it's it can be difficult to find the right way to lay. You'll see online, you'll see a lot of people advocate for get a wider hammock, get a bigger hammock, get a longer hammock, but you really don't need that, because a hammock that's well suited to you will guide you into that good diagonal lay to really support you in the way that the hammock is designed to be laid in. Online, you see this adage of the bigger the better, and that's what I compare it to is a pair of pants. That if I have super tight pants, that's no good. If I have loose pants, I can make it work, but also, why would I consider those two options? Why wouldn't I just get something that's suited to me? And the reality is that's just going to be your best option either way, is just get something that's well suited to you.
That makes sense. Like if you have the option for customization, then you might as well do it.
Right.
You can get that all dialed in. You might as well get the thing that's gonna be more comfortable, more appropriate if you're going on like the too tight pants, like we're gonna get the better option. So to close up here, Matt, we have kind of two final questions. One is our flagship question, and we'll save that for Avery for the very end. But we've sung the 1.7 mountain praises, but I am curious to know about some other recommendations for people. And it's okay if 1.7 is an answer for one of these, but I want to touch base with you on a few. I'm going to give you a few hammock examples or a few ways that people might use hammocks, and then have you give one or two recommendations on the material that you would choose personally if you were to make this hammock for you or your family member specifically. So for one, let's talk about leisurely use. People want to take a hike, bring a hammock with them to throw up in the woods and enjoy a good lie down and a book read or a nap or something in the woods for a little bit. What material would you go with for just a leisure use hammock?
If weight doesn't matter that much, 2.2 hex 70. It's strong, it's durable. The moment we got it, we took one of our titanium tent stakes, and I remember my mother holding it up tight and my father taking it and just scratching it and like jamming it in just to see. And it's like, okay, yeah, this thing will last ages. So if weight doesn't matter, get something nice and heavy. And alternatively, 1.7 is another great option. And the other thing about both of those is they're 74 inches wide, 72, 74. It actually depends on
72, I think, yeah.
which run it's from. But if it's 72 or 74 inches wide, it's big enough for just about anybody. So if you're 6'7", if you're a real tall guy, it's wide enough for you. We can make a hammock to fit your needs. If it's 60 inches wide, sorry, you're out of luck. Right.
That is a great point. Okay, next example is 3-season camping. You want kind of the do it all hammock that won't take on the Arctic temperatures. Do you have any recommendations other than 1.7 mountain for this one? It's okay if you don't. I just wanted to pose it.
Not. I don't see fabric choice making a drastic difference for in regards to weather. So it depends on you're doing those shoulder seasons camping. What are you doing? Are you bike packing? Are you kayak packing? Or are you car camping? Because if you're car camping, doesn't matter. So it's the only thing I would say is just mindful of the overcover. If you want something that'll keep you warm, then having an overcover to redirect that airflow and not allow just the mosquito netting, the draft to just take the heat out of your hammock.
That makes a lot of sense. Cool.
I was going to ask, and this is something that I'm curious about. I've definitely gotten this question before, and you might have the same fabric answer, which is totally fine. But what fabric would you recommend if I was hammock camping with my dog?
Oh, yeah. Hex 70, for sure.
Sweet. Awesome.
And that's a question we get quite a bit too, is, I'm worried about my dog's nails, and, not like small dogs, not, Yorkies, Chihuahuas, miniature pinchers, but like St. Bernards and Labs and Retrievers and, big dogs. They're like, listen, I have a 100-pound monster jumping in the hammock with me with big sharp nails. is that smart? And I'm like, well, no, it's not necessarily smart, but if you're gonna do it, get a hammock that you think can a fabric that can withstand it.
Sweet. I'm glad to know that I'm not the only one that has thought of that question or been curious. So now it's on the record. 2.2 ounce Hex 70, most durable.
Oh yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. We have just one final flagship question for you that we like to ask everyone. But in your opinion, what is a fabric that is missing on the market? If you could make a fabric from scratch, what would it be? What qualities would it have? What's your dream fabric?
Yeah, so I knew this question was coming because I listen semi regularly to the podcast, and I knew this question was coming, and I've been thinking about it since you emailed me about, hey, do you want to come on the podcast? And I hate to say I don't really have an answer. The only thing that I really thought of was genuinely, and you're going to laugh at this, but a mimic of the 1.7 MTN. Because
that's fair.
I mean, really, I think it's a fantastic fabric, and I've made that abundantly clear. So I'm not going to go into my reason as to why. But the only downside of 1.7, or the only major downside of 1.7 MTN, is simply it's a little more expensive, and generally narrower fabrics are going to be cheaper. So the only thing I could think to answer your question is a non-wide 1.7 that cut costs for people like me who I'm 5'8", 5'9", something like that, and I don't need a 72-inch wide hammock, 74-inch wide hammock. I need a 60, 61, 62-inch wide hammock. So if I'm making myself a hammock, I'm throwing away a foot, or we rarely throw away scraps. We always save them to, use for stuff. But I mean, if there was a cheaper or a more affordable, narrower version of 1.7 MTN, I think we would end up using that quite a bit. And then my other answer would be something as light as a cloud, but as durable as canvas.
This is the place for the dream fabric. So I completely respect that. No matter how impossible they feel, I do think that one day they could come true. So I still like the vision of like this epic material one day. I like that a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Matt, one other thing I wanted to say is it's cool to finally talk to you all. It's definitely time we have Dream Hammock on. You all have been big supporters of Ripstop of the Roll for a very long time. You're one of our,
sure.
I don't think I'm wrong in saying you're one of our longest customers we've ever had. It's been, it's an amazing partnership to have with you all. So I can't recommend enough people to go check out Dream Hammock. So everyone listening, if you already have a hammock, go check out Dream Hammock. If you don't have a hammock, go check out Dream Hammock.
I appreciate it.
They've been in business for this long for a very good reason. And they're well worth checking out. So where can people find you and what you all do?
It's dreamhammock.com. That's the website. We're on social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, except for I haven't been keeping up with TikTok at all this year, just because my wife was pregnant for most of it. So I keep going back to hey, we're a small business who has less than 4 employees. So anyway, that's it. And I will say if this I don't know what the turnaround time is on podcast, but December we are having a stocking stuffer promotional thing. So if you have a hammock, you can add a stocking stuffer for free. So tent stakes, tree straps, carabiners, and it's in part a promotional thing, but it is, I have written that it's a way to say thank you, and I genuinely mean that, because I think the hammocking community is something that I'm honored and genuinely happy to be part of. Oh, and we also have another promotion. if you use the offer code BA-humbug ! It gives you 1 penny off your order. Nobody's
That's the
used
best
it
one.
yet.
That's the best one. You got to use it.
Nobody's used it yet. I really hope.
That's a
I'm really
shame.
curious on the statistics of how many we get.
I like that. Well, yeah, Matt, this has been really fun. Thank you. I mean, especially considering you have a 3-week-old child now. Thank you for spending this time with us and sharing. It's been awesome. So we always talk soon. You'll be in contact with somebody here, I'm sure, hopefully very soon. But
For sure.
Until next time, thank you.
All right. Yep. Thank you guys very much.